highly destructive energy systems. This $5 trillion industry, energy and transportation, is currently highly centralized, metered, and lucrative. It is the stuff that runs the entire industrialized world. It is the mother of all special interests. It is not about money as you and I think of it, but about geopolitical power, the very centralized power on which the current order of the world runs. The world is kept in a state of rolling wars, endless poverty for most of Earth's denizens, and global environmental ruin, just to prop up this evil world order. As immense as that game is, there is a bigger one, control through fear. As Wernher von Braun related to Dr. Carl Reisen, his spokesperson for the last 4 years of his life, a manacled machine, the military industrial intelligence laboratory complex, will go from Cold War to rogue nations to global terrorism, the stage we find ourselves at today, to the ultimate trump card, a hoaxed threat from space. To justify eventually spending trillions of dollars on space weapons, the world would be deceived about a threat from outer space, thus uniting the world in fear, in militarism and in war. Since 1992, I have seen this script unveiled to me by at least a dozen well-placed insiders. Of course, initially I laughed, thinking this just too absurd and far-fetched. Dr. Rosen gave her testimony to the Disclosure Project before 9/11, and yet others told me explicitly that things that look like UFOs, but that are built and under the control of deeply sensitive black projects, were being used to simulate hoax ET appearing events, including some abductions and cattle mutilations. That's what I was also told, of course. To sow the early seeds of cultural fear regarding life in outer space, and that at some point after global terrorism, events would unfold that would utilize the now revealed alien reproduction vehicles, ARVs, or reverse-engineered UFOs made by humans by studying actual ET craft. See the book Disclosure by the same author, to hoax an attack on Earth. Like the movie Independence Day, an attempt to unite the world through militarism would unfold using ET as a new cosmic scapegoat. Think Jews during the Third Reich. In other words, the new one they would target. None of this is new to me or other insiders. The report from the Iron Mountain, New York, written in the 1960s, described the need to demonize life in outer space so we could have a new enemy. An enemy off-planet that could unite humans in fear and war, and that would prove to be the ultimate prop for the trillion-dollar military-industrial complex that conservative Republican President and five-star General Eisenhower warned us about in 1961. No one was listening then either. So here is the post-9/11 script, one that will be played out unless enough people are informed, and the plan can be foiled because they will be unable to fool a sufficient number of citizens and leaders. And as I have said before, the cabal thrives on fear, or false evidence appearing real, surprise, and stealth. Now, when you take those three elements or dynamics away, they all fall apart, like a house of cards, okay? And that's one of my reasons I'm doing today's show on the subject, and also quoting Stephen Greer's letter, the importance of people realizing how determined the power elite are. Now, of course, Ashtar's channeling implies that, in fact, they will probably not be successful, especially if we rise up and take personal responsibility and demand an end to the use of technology for anything but benevolent humanitarian reasons. That they're going to continue to try to fool us by the ultimate objective, as Wernher von Braun, of course, knew about and shared with Carl Reisen. After a period of terrorism, a period during which the deception, during which the detonation of nuclear devices will be threatened and possibly actuated. Well, you know, I know they're not going to be able to do it because, as I shared the story many times, as I share in my book, Prepare for the Landings, you know, when I was watching President Kennedy's news conference on the Cuban Missile Crisis, I was 9 years old at the time, all of a sudden Ashtar pops into the room, theoretically, and he's standing there, and he says to me, "We're not going to allow nuclear war because it's against Federation policy." And he told me, but in the future, The world leaders will hold this possible threat over our heads like a real probable possibility. Ooh, we never know when it might happen. And Asher also told me later about the nuke suitcases, and he said, but they would use this as a tactic of fear, even though the leaders themselves had been warned. He also told me about how they had and would be coming down over military bases and shutting down the nuclear missiles. Well, as I shared in this recent last show, now these guys are coming out, and as they did this last week, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., sharing about the fact they were on duty and watching the UFOs come down. And, this was all verifying what Asher had told me many years ago, back in the 60s, that this would happen, had happened, would be happening. So we have all these whistleblowers now coming out officially, admitting and talking about this, and letting the officials know that they could shut things down, and were shutting that as a benevolent show of force, that they were not going to allow Earth to be destroyed by nuclear war, and they were going to, they would eventually force the outlawing of nuclear weapons. But this was still a tactic of theirs. They thought they could get away with it. Okay, it says the ancient nuclear device will be threatened and possibly actuated, thus justifying expanding the weaponization of space. An effort will ramp up to present the public with information about a threat from outer space, not just asteroids hitting the Earth, but other threats, an extraterrestrial threat. And, of course, don't forget Nibiru. Now, this is authentic. This is an authentic threat in the sense, except the Federation is planning to evacuate. If it comes down to that, as in other times, every 3,600 years, Nibiru comes through. And I've always said I think Mother Earth needs a good facelift. But the fact we are going to have evacuation, or if we think that there's going to be a vast solar storms. If you saw the movie Knowing by Nicolas Cage, at the end of the movie, there's a huge evacuation that takes place. The light ship's coming in. So there is truth to these things, but it's how it's being presented. Over the past 40 years, ufology, as it is called, combined with the mighty media machine, has increasingly demonized ETs via fearsome movies like Independence Day or World of Worlds, and pseudoscience that presents alien kidnappings and abuse as a fact, and in some cases, of modern life. That some humans have had contact with ETs, I have no doubt. That the real ET contact has been submerged, or the positive one submerged, in an ocean of hoaxed accounts, I am certain. That is, real ET events are seldom reported out to the public. That is, if they're benevolent or positive. The machine ensures that the hoaxed, frightening, and intrinsically xenophobic accounts are the ones seen and read by millions. This mental conditioning to fear ET has been subtly reinforced for decades in preparation for future deceptions that will make 9/11 look trivial. That's what I was talking about earlier. This is the cosmic deception that they want to force on everybody. And hopefully people are going to wake up fast enough. And that's why I'm doing this show, because I want people to realize the seriousness of this, even though higher forces are also set to neutralize these kinds of technologies. But it's up to us taking responsibility and getting our head out of the sand and saying, yes, this is a possible situation, but it won't occur, or is less likely to occur, if we, the public and the masses, wake up and say, I don't want to be fooled again, I was fooled enough, because it's like insult and type of injury. They've already fooled us with mundane things, and then to be able to fool us, to insult us with something that claims to be from higher realms, but is not, but a government doing it themselves, using things like Project Bluebeam to project holographic images into the sky and fool everybody with something that isn't really occurring. So there's evidence that this technology has been around a while, but also in this channeling, Ashton was talking about how they did test it during the Iraq War, and then the higher forces stepped in and neutralized as they tried to use it again in other situations. I write this now because I have recently been contacted by several highly placed media and intelligence sources that have made it clear to me that hoaxed events and storylines are imminent. Now think about this now. That they can use the mass corporate control media with stories or things taken out of context or made to look like it was ET when it wasn't, of course, because the government doing this. Storylines are imminent that will attempt to further ramp up the fear machine regarding UFOs and ETs. After all, to have an enemy, you must have the people hate and fear a person, a group of people, or in this case, an entire category of beings. To be clear, the mechanical covert programs controlling UFO secrecy, ARVs, and related technologies, including those technologies that can stimulate ET events, ET abductions and the like, plan to hijack disclosure, spin it into a fire of fear, and roll out events that will eventually present ET as the new enemy. Do not be deceived. This hogwash, already the stuff of countless books, videos, movies, documentaries, and the like, will attempt to gloom onto the facts, evidence, and first-hand insider testimony of the Disclosure Project, and on its coattails deliver to the world the cosmic deception that falsely portrays ET as a threat from space. Do not be deceived. By commingling fact with fiction, and by hoaxing UFO events that can look terrifying, the plan is to eventually create a new sustainable off-planet enemy. And who will be the wiser? You will, because you now know that after 60 years, trillions of dollars, and the best scientific minds in the world pressed into action, a secretive, shadowy group, a government within the government, and at once fully outside the government as we know it, has mastered the technologies, the art of deception, and the capability to launch an attack on Earth and make it look like ET. ETs did it. In 1997, I brought a man to Washington to brief members of Congress and others about this plan. Our entire team at the time met this man. He had been present at planning sessions when ARVs, things built by Lockheed, Northrop, etc., and housed in secretive locations around the world, would be used to simulate an attack on certain assets, making leaders and citizens alike believe that there was a threat from space when there is none. Before he could testify, his handlers spirited him away to a secret location in Virginia till the briefing was over. Sound familiar? Werner von Braun warned of such a hoax as a pretext for putting war in space, and many others have warned of the same. Space-based weapons are already in space, part of a secret parallel space program that has been operating since the 1960s. ARVs are built and ready to go. See the book Disclosure and the chapter with the testimony of Mark McCandlish. Space holographic deception technologies are in place, Project Bluebeam, tested and ready to fire. And the big media is a pawn, now taking dictation from the right hand of the king. I know this all sounds like science fiction, absurd, impossible, just like 9/11 would have sounded before 9/11. But the unthinkable happened and may happen again, unless we are vigilant. Combine all of this with the current atmosphere of fear and manipulation, this was, of course, in 2002, and there is a real risk of suspending our collective judgment and our Constitution. But know this. If there was a threat from outer space, we would have known about it as soon as humans started exploding nuclear weapons, going into space with manned travel. That we are still breathing the free air of Earth, given the galactically stupid and reckless actions of an out-of-control, illegal secret group, is abundant testimony to the restraint and peaceful intentions of these visitors. The threat is wholly human, and it is we who must address this threat, rein it in and transform the current situation of war, destruction, and secret manipulation to one of the true disclosure and an era of sustained peace. War in space to replace war on Earth is not evolution, but cosmic madness. A world thus united in fear is worse than one divided by ignorance. It is now time for the great leap into the future, a leap that moves us out of fear and ignorance and into an unbroken era of universal peace. Know that this is our destiny, and it will be ours just as soon as we choose it. Stephen Greer, MD, June 2002. I just thought it was very interesting, because of the focus and the really, I think, passionate sincerity that he wrote this letter at that time, right after, of course, 2009/11, within the year afterwards, that people, most of humanity, had not quite awakened. But in the last several years since that time, I think, especially the last year or two, a huge awakening has taken place, where it's been building up with